What makes podcasting ads different?
Yeah, that is such a great question. So the huge distinguishing factor between podcast advertising and really many or not most other forms of advertising is the host-read endorsement ad. You are aligning with brands that you can actually really get behind. And then secondarily, it's really important that you're creating authentic, organic ad reads because that is going to allow your audience to respond. And that is the power behind podcast advertising.
How can I position my podcast in a way that I can actually get podcast advertisers to answer the phone and take me on?
It's really important that you really address your show as something that you're doing professionally. If you have the quality that they are looking for, and if you have the consistency, then they will be able to see, gosh, I know that if I partner with this show, this is what I'm going to get.
If you're looking to get advertising for your podcast, you just stumbled on the right video, the right podcast, the right audio experience at the right time. We're joined today by the founder of TrueNativeMedia.com. Over 50,000 podcast ads placed. Heather Osgood, what's good?
So great to be here with you today, Mark.
Heather, an honor that just for me and all the business owners, after hours entrepreneurs here today that are trying to create better content in less time, we're trying to get paid. We're trying to make some money here today, all right? So before we go into some of the really nitty-gritty, roll up our sleeves and get to talking about how to actually do this and how to get paid more, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you help podcasters?
Yeah, so I founded True Native Media in actually January of 2016. And I founded the company because I saw that there were all of these podcasts out there that were really great shows that didn't have any advertisements on them. And I thought, gosh, that is so strange that there's these great shows that don't have ads on them. And then really, I researched the industry and I found that if you were a huge mega show, you had no problems getting ads, but there were all of these other shows that really could benefit from advertisers. And I knew that one of the stumbling blocks was that most podcast, creators aren't ad salespeople, right? So just because you've got a great show doesn't mean you have the aptitude to go out and sell ads on your show. So we founded True Native Media to help those podcasters connect with advertisers. So currently we represent about 70 different shows, and our role is to specifically connect them with advertisers.
Wow, 70 shows. That's amazing, Heather. Congratulations. And that tells me that you've positioned yourself and your company, True Native Media. You positioned yourself in the right place. You found a problem, you developed a solution, and it's working for you. It's working for clients. It's growing. So I want to go a little bit deeper on positioning. Okay? Because I find that when it comes to advertisements or even getting listeners, actually appealing to people, you got to position yourself in front of the right people with the right message. So if I'm a podcaster, I'm trying to build up my media empire, trying to grow fans, I need some cash to help fund that because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of money. What's a way that I can position myself as someone that people want to advertise? How can I position my podcast in a way that I can actually get podcast advertisers to answer the phone and take me on? What's a good way to position my show?
It's really important that you really address your show as something that you're doing professionally. So a lot of times podcasters fall into that hobbyist category, right? Like, oh, this is kind of a cool thing. I'm just going to go ahead and produce my show whenever I feel like it. And if you are looking to attract advertisers, you really need to approach it as a business. And I know, Mark, that you talk on the show about how important it is to, leverage this content in your business. And the content, and I would say the podcast in particular, is a business into itself, right? So if you're looking to get paid for what you do, number one, you have to create quality, consistent content. And I'm sure that that is something that most people have heard before, but I cannot stress how important it is to do that. Because if you are a podcaster and you're like, hey, I'm just going to, drop an episode whenever I feel like it, whenever I've got a little extra time, I'm going to make an episode and I'm going to put it out there. Then you create these huge inconsistencies. You might produce 4 or 5 episodes one month. The next month you don't produce any. The following you produce 2. And from an advertiser's perspective, they're taking a look at what it is that you are creating. And number one, they're saying, do I want to align myself with this content, right? Because you are going to be a brand ambassador for what it is that they are trying to create in their businesses, right? You're going to be an ambassador for their product. So why would they want to partner with you? And if you have the quality that they are looking for for. And if you have the consistency, then they will be able to see, gosh, I know that if I partner with this show, this is what I'm going to get. So really that is the first place to start, is really with that quality and consistency.
This makes a lot of sense to me. And last week in Clubhouse, you can listen to this podcast episode as well, talking to Cliff Ravenscraft about how important consistency is. And if I'm hearing you correctly, it's being consistent with the quality of your show and probably consistently improving, but also consistency with the frequency of your episodes. Because that's one of the strengths, Heather, right, of podcasting is this is going to be out there forever in perpetuity. People are going to be able to binge listen to this. And you might not necessarily have a huge show now, but if these advertisers know that your show is going to continue to be produced, they know that people can listen to this 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, as long as they respect the consistency. I do have a question about consistency though, about positioning and the way that podcast ads are even positioned in the marketplace right now. Because as a small business, as a sponsor, I can spend my marketing dollars in a lot of places. I can be running Facebook ads, I can be running TV ads, I can be running magazines, I can put my money in a lot of different places. Why is podcasting uniquely positioned as a place that advertisers need to be? What makes podcasting ads different?
Yeah, that is such a great question. So I always think that we need to look at ad blockers, right? We need to think about all of the places in our lives where we as consumers put ad blockers into place. None of us is out there saying, gosh, please give me more ads. That would just really make my day if you could deliver more ads to me. So, as a society, we're trying to get away from ads. So what makes us think that we are going to, have this ability to get ads on our show? And the difference and the huge distinguishing factor between podcast advertising and really many or not most other forms of advertising is the host-read endorsement ad. So when we look at podcast advertising, we really have to put it into the influencer marketing category. When you are running ads on Facebook or Instagram, when you're, running Google ads, when you are running any form of digital marketing, any sort of outreach in any other way, it is very intrusive. And you as a podcast host have the ability to really partner with brands that are going to have a positive impact on your audience, right? We all want to buy products and services. And how is it that we as hosts can select those products and services that we know are going to edify the lives of our audience? And thus, by edifying our lives, it makes it so much more effective, right? Because if I said to you, Mark, oh my gosh, you have got to try out HelloFresh. I cannot tell you how much better it has made my whole home work-life balance. I'm not stressing out about what I'm going to eat for dinner tonight or how I'm going to feed my kids or whatever. Then all of a sudden it doesn't feel like an ad, right? It feels like a friend telling you that you should purchase something. So as a host, it's really important for you, like I mentioned, that you are aligning with brands that you can actually really get behind. And then secondarily, it's really important that you're creating authentic, organic ad reads, because that is going to allow your audience to respond. And that is the power behind podcast advertising that really, it just doesn't compare to other forms of advertising out there.
So a lot of really great stuff. And I definitely agree with you on the warm audience part. That's part of the advantage of going through an influencer like a podcaster, that warm audience. But I got to say, the other day, I was fast forwarding through the ads on a television commercial because I DVR'd the show. And I'm fast forwarding through the ads and I'm just watching these ads. And I'm like, trash, 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 trash. And the chance of me actually taking action on one of these TV ads is zero. It's zero because it hasn't enhanced my experience. It hasn't given me any useful information. It's just a freaking ad. And I love this point you made about the value of the host being able to have a great ad read and being able to engage the audience in a way that's special. It's different than some random marketing dollar that's being crammed down your throat in a place that you don't want it or don't need it. Is there anything I can do as a podcast host to make sure I have great ad reads? So let me kind of reframe this. What's something I can do as a podcast host to have a great, compelling ad read that attracts more advertisers? Anything I can do?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, how you can attract other advertisers is by getting response for the advertisers that you have. So, number one, I think it's really important that you look at how engaged your audience is. And a good way of gauging or finding out the engagement level of your audience is by trying different tactics, right? So, are they responding when you are asking them to do something? Whether that's, hey, I want you to join my Facebook group. I want you to, get on my email list because I've got these great things to offer you. I want you to, do my survey and I'll give you an Amazon gift card, right? Whatever it is that you are asking of your audience, you want to see that they are responding to you, because if they're responding to you, then you have an engaged audience. So making sure that that engagement piece is really important. And I think that's just important for your show, period. But then when we transition into ad reads, you want those ad reads to actually really produce results. So what I recommend is tell your audience, hey, the reason that I'm bringing you these products is because number one, I think they're great products for you. Number two, this is helping me create better content for you. And so there's nothing wrong with asking your audience to solicit the advertisers that you bring them. And I think that you should. I don't necessarily think that you should do it right before the ad read. Like, hey guys, here comes an ad read. And oh, by the way, make sure you buy from them. I just think that in the conversation that you have on an ongoing basis, thanking your audience for supporting your sponsors is really important. And then we could go into kind of the anatomy of a good ad read, but you want to make your ad as interesting as possible. So the reason that I named our company True Native Media is because native advertising is really advertising that feels like content. Now, don't get me wrong. We're not trying to trick anyone. We're not trying to break any laws here. Everyone knows that these are sponsors. But if you're listening to a podcast and then all of a sudden the whole tenor and the whole sound of that show changes, in your mind, you're gonna be like, oh, what's happening? Like they're doing something different. They're going to an ad, right? And people fast forward through podcast ads too, right? So how can you make ads that people want to listen to? And often that is by not starting with, hey guys, let me tell you about this cool product. It's by telling a story of some sort, right? Yeah. And so if you can engage your audience into that message, it's going to be way more effective and ultimately result in more success for you and your advertisers.
I love that point about telling a story, and maybe it's even a personal experience that you've had with the product. I had this problem. I used the product or service. Now my problem is solved. I really like what you said there, Heather. I want to kind of go back to something you said at the beginning, which is something that I found to be a common denominator when discussing sponsorships, ads, things of that nature, and that's engagement, right? Being able to show advertisers that when you run ads, it gets results. There is engagement there. But that can be a very difficult thing to show on a podcast. It can be very difficult to show that. One of the ideas that I have, one of the things you commonly see is go to www.johnsmith.com/mark, right? So that they have some sort of link set up so that you can know where the traffic's coming from. I've also played with Bitly links in the past. I'll have a link for either affiliate product or through a vendor, and it gives me a little bit more control. Is there any other way that we can actually prove the engagement that we actually have, Heather? Any other metrics that you can think of?
Yeah, so it is, like you mentioned, it's really important to make sure with any advertiser that number one, you've got their goals defined before the campaign launches, so you know what they're trying to accomplish. And then number two, you want to make sure that there is a really strong call to action associated with a promo code or a URL so that we can track the results. And that's how most really podcast advertising is tracked currently. There are attribution tracking companies, and I would highly encourage you to investigate them further. The two that we interact most with, there's one called Pod Sites, and it's Pod SIGHT, so Pod Sites. The other one that people are probably a little bit more familiar with is Chartable. So Chartable does rankers and allows you to see audience information, but they also essentially have pixel tracking capabilities. And what that means is that essentially the listeners that you have go through So first they go through this redirect, and Podsights is able to say like, oh, this, it's not this person. They don't know Mark is listening, but they know, your unique essentially identifier on the back end. And then the advertiser places a pixel track on their website. And then we're able to say like, oh, this person listened to this podcast and then they went over and made a purchasing decision. So that does get a little bit more technical. And depending on where you're at in your journey, you might decide that you would prefer to work with, a company like a representation firm like True Native or Advertise Cast, marketplaces. They oftentimes will implement those pixel tracking devices, but definitely there's a lot happening from the technological side of things in the ad space, which is really exciting because ultimately we want to be able to prove to our advertisers that we're getting results. And essentially using promo codes is just online couponing, right? Because you have to use that coupon in order for the advertiser to see that you're getting results. And so if we can build in these other mechanisms that don't require the listener to do anything, it's really helpful.
Well, listen, y'all, you got to go to heatherosgood.com because Heather is giving you the goods today. That's heatherosgood.com. She's giving you away the goods. And I just want to kind of recap because we gave a lot of really important information here, Heather. I just want to kind of recap what we did here, right? So today we've really been talking about positioning yourself as a podcaster, as a business owner who's trying to leverage a podcast to drive more income, okay? How can you position yourself in a way that's going to help you land advertisers and how you get those advertisers to pay you more? So right now we've been talking about some different ways that you can prove engagement because I think across the board, that's what really counts at getting your advertiser. So we've talked about a few different ways to do that. One is having a backslash plus a particular code or coupon, right, with the advertisers themselves. Another way that I mentioned was setting up a bit.ly link, that's BITLY, and that's basically a way of tracking who's clicking on buttons, and you can set up your own custom bit.ly links. It's free too, by the way, to set that up, and that's bit.ly.com, I believe, or bit.ly.org. It's bit.ly, BITLY. And I also love this idea, Heather, about using a program like Chartable, because Chartable will show how engaged your audience is. How long are they listening to episodes? Where the traffic is coming from. I don't use Chartable a ton, but I know it's a very good program. It's even free to get started with Chartable as well.
It is, yeah.
So these are really, really, really great tips. I do also want to ask you, Heather, about ads themselves, right? Because you can integrate ads directly into your podcast episodes, or you can set up dynamic ads, right? And a dynamic ad, correct me if I'm wrong, allows you to change out the ad at any time for any reason in the future. So I can set up an ad today with one vendor. 6 months down the road, I can change out that dynamic ad for a new vendor. Are there any pros and cons with dynamic versus integrated ads? Am I breaking this down properly? Help me out.
Yeah, no, gosh, you bring up a really good point. So we call them either embedded or baked in ads versus dynamically inserted ads. So the industry has traditionally been more embedded or baked in ads. And usually if you are starting out, you're going to do those baked in and embedded ads. And the reason is that you have to have a level of technology in your hosting company in order to do those dynamically inserted ads. So this is where I get to talk about hosting providers. And if you are not aware of, number one, who your hosting provider is, or number two, the capabilities of your hosting provider, I highly recommend that you look into those, because if we are talking about ad automation and even potentially having programmatic or pre-recorded ads that are just inserted into your podcast, which can be a really good and easy way to make money as well, you have to be set up with the right hosting provider that allows for dynamic ad insertion. So make sure that you have the right hosting provider. I believe that our entire industry is going to be doing dynamically inserted ads. My estimation is probably within the next 2 to 3 years. And the reason is that when you are doing embedded ad reads, the listener is only going to hear that ad for that particular episode, right? So if you put an ad in episode 100 for ZipRecruiter, if I listen to episode 100, I'm going to hear that ad. If I listen to episode 99 or episode 101, I'm not going to hear that ad. So you can only sell the number of downloads or impressions that one episode is getting. Whereas with dynamic insertion, essentially how it works is that you put ad markers throughout your whole catalog. So if I listened to episode 2 today and you had an ad for ZipRecruiter, I would hear that if it was embedded, but I could listen to episode 2 today and have an ad that was dynamically inserted. So instead of having the ads live in your podcast indefinitely, we set a time period. So we say from November 1st through November 30th, anyone who listens to the podcast, whether it is a current or a back catalog episode, will have that ad served up to them. And obviously, think about how many downloads you're getting per episode in a 30-day period versus how many downloads you get across your entire catalog.
Right.
So we're able to serve up a much greater number of impressions, which of course then results in much bigger dollar amounts. And as you mentioned, it's really helpful for the advertiser because now we don't have an old stale ad out there from, 2 years ago. I can actually talk to you today about something that you would be interested in purchasing. And it's really important to know that with these dynamically inserted ads, they definitely can and should be host read. So I know I mentioned those pre-recorded programmatic ads, and that's an opportunity, but you're going to get top dollar for doing those host read dynamically inserted ads.
So yeah, I'm with you there. As far as positioning yourself with these vendors, basically what I'm hearing you say is all your ads on your podcast should be host read because that's the value that you bring. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so this is interesting, Heather, because I kind of see a different perspective on the dynamic versus the embedded ads, right? But you brought up a lot of good points. Playing devil's advocate here, if I'm positioning the ads on my show to an advertiser, I could say, listen, you give me $500 or $1,000 for the ad placement. This is going to be here in perpetuity. It will never be displaced or replaced in the future dynamically. The flip side is that maybe the ad goes stale. So you bring up an interesting point. Don't you think that's a way I could position my ads? So let's say, for example, I don't have a ton of downloads per month, right? Let's say it's a brand new podcast even. I'm an expert attorney. I've been in my field, but it's a brand new podcast. I'm trying to get some funding for it. Would you say that might be a unique situation where doing embedded ads might get you a better experience when it comes to connecting with advertisers, or do you still think dynamic ads are the way to go? What are your thoughts?
What I believe should happen is that if you are interested in monetizing your podcast through ads, number one, I always encourage people start today. Don't wait, because if you think that this is what you're going to want to do, try everything you can to get an advertiser today, because you're going to educate your audience that you have advertisers in your show. So that's really important. Like I mentioned, you have to be set up with a hosting provider that allows for dynamic insertion, and most of them are truthfully quite pricey. So you have this ability to use that service and make more money, but you're going to be paying probably at minimum around $100 a month, I would say, and that's the minimum. So if you're paying $10 or $15 a month or free right now with maybe one of your hosting providers, you have to decide that you want to be at that level. So usually it's best as a podcaster to start out with embedded ad reads. And then once your show reaches a certain level and a certain size, then switch to dynamic. I would also say that from an advertiser standpoint, advertisers love embedded ads because they're paying you, like you said, $500 today. They are going to continue to get exposure to their ad, and they're not paying for those, right? The only thing I can compare embedded podcast ads to are magazine ads, right? So yes, maybe, you ran an ad in a magazine and it had its, release date, but then people could continue to pick that magazine up for years. In the same way, if you have an embedded ad in your show, people are going to continue to listen to that episode for years. And if your show, depending on the type of show you have, if your show becomes more popular, true crime shows, especially, lately, I feel like I've talked to several where they go from nothing to, 200,000 downloads in 60 days. So if you are, if you've got that content that does kind of, go viral or grows quickly, that advertiser just paid $500 for huge exposure. So there is definitely value in embedded ad reads, but I would say, and start with embedded ad reads, but then from my estimation, when you get to around, I would say like between 20 to 50,000 downloads per month, that's when it's a good time to switch to dynamic.
Good stuff. And I love how we went really deep here on this topic here today, Heather. And again, it's all been about positioning. because I think that at the end of the day, your show needs to be positioned, your ads need to be positioned, the vendors that you work with everything needs to be positioned properly. And I love the idea that both dynamic and embedded can position you uniquely to give better value to your advertisers. You just got to understand where you're at in this process. I love the idea of just getting started and just going. Before we get to the overrated, underrated section, Heather, I need to ask you about something that's been happening to me more frequently, and I want your opinion on it. Listen, that's one of the advantages of having a podcast. I bring the experts on so they can school me on how to improve my business and my show and your show. Thanks for listening, by the way, listening and watching. So Heather, I want to ask you about incoming ad requests. I'm starting to get a lot of emails from vendors that want to advertise on the After Hours Entrepreneur. How should I handle these incoming requests? How should I handle this stuff?
What a great question. And congratulations that you're getting those requests. So that's great. That means that obviously people are taking notice of your show. What I recommend is that you do a number of things. So first of all, obviously you have to decide, do you want advertisers, right? So if you've decided that you want advertisers, then you'll know how to position yourself. Secondly, you need to make sure that you have something put together so that when an advertiser reaches out to you, you can respond to them in a way that isn't like, kind of chicken scratching an email. Sure, yeah, that sounds good. How much you gonna pay me type thing, right? So create a media kit for yourself, and media kits don't have to be long. They don't have to be overwhelming. Essentially, you just want to put in there who you are, why your show is interesting, and what your show is. You want to make sure you're including your listener demographic. So if you don't know who's listening to your show, make sure you do a survey or find out exactly who's listening to your show. And then you want to create different packages. So I know, Mark, you mentioned that Clubhouse is a really big outlet for you. And I know you probably have other social media channels that are large. If you're just starting out, I recommend that you package things together. So put your podcast ads in there and say, hey, and I'll put you on Clubhouse, and I'll put you in my Facebook group, or I'll mention you on, my Instagram reels or feed, or, whatever, so put together a package and then determine what it is worth to you. So in terms of pricing a package, you want to make sure that it is a win-win. And what I mean by that is you don't want to work for $50, right? And I know in this space, we talk about CPM pricing or cost per thousand pricing a lot. And we could throw around like, oh, well, the average is a $30 CPM and I've got 1,000 downloads an episode. So should I be charging $30 for an ad? Like, no, nobody, you don't want to work for $30 an ad, right? So, but how do you create value for that advertiser so that they are getting exposure? Because ultimately, if you say, well, I'm getting 1,000 downloads, I'm going to throw them in some social posts, I think that's worth $1,500. Well, how much is that advertiser going to need to recoup that investment that they're making? So I have definitely had, podcasters in the past where they'll come to me and they'll say, well, I had this advertiser, I charged them $750 an ad, and they ran with me for 4 ads and then they never came back. Like, why is that? I'm like, it's because you way overpriced your ads and they couldn't get a good return on their investment. So you need to make sure it's a win-win. So put together those packages and then feel it out. If you send it over to somebody and they're like, wow, that's really pricey, which a lot of advertisers will tell you what they think, get what their impression is of your pricing. Or if they're like, yep, that's great. If they don't negotiate with you at all, you're probably pricing it too cheap.
Right.
But, you want to kind of see where that resistance level is, but get that piece put together so that when I say piece, I mean that media kit, and it could be one sheet, it could be a couple of sheets. I usually recommend that you hire a professional to design that. Go on Upwork, make it look really nice, because you want them to know that they're partnering with somebody who's investing in what it is that they're creating. But send that media kit to them, and that's a really good first step.
I mean, this is just, Heather Osgood is giving you the goods. Go to heatherosgood.com to get more. And I just really love the thing you said, Heather, about what's the value you bring to that brand. Because if you're able to position yourself in a way that you give massive value, I mean, that's at the end of the day what it's all about. That is what it's all about. And you got to get started, like Heather said. I mean, we could go super, super, super deep on this. And one of the things I'm actually thinking about, making this media kit, maybe just starting a drive in my cloud. And so anytime someone reaches out to me, I can say, hey, You want information? Go to this drive. There'll be maybe a welcome video where I explain the value that I can offer, maybe articulate, maybe give them an example of how amazing I am at doing those ad reads. And then give them the media kit right there. I like to make things easy. I like to make systems, put systems in place. So, Heather, thank you for these wise words of wisdom. That's HeatherOsgood.com. Heather, before we let you go here, overrated, underrated. Are you ready? You fired up? Are you still got some juice left in the tank? All right.
Yes.
All right. So as a fellow Floridian, I always like to lead off with overrated, underrated alligators.
Oh, they're definitely overrated. I was so afraid of alligators when I moved to Florida. And the other day, my husband and I were walking and we were by this little pond. He's like, oh, look, there's a 7-foot alligator. I'm like, oh yeah, there it goes. Like, yeah, definitely overrated.
Alligators almost never mess with you. Just don't feed them. Don't feed the alligators, kids. Don't do it.
They always swim away from you. Clap, run. They're,
Right. They can, however, jump. I believe it's 6 feet out of the water, so don't underestimate.
No way,
them.
really?
Oh, they can move, baby. They can jump. Yeah. So, alligators. I love me some alligators. Favorite animal. All right, cool. Overrated, underrated television ads.
Oh, overrated. Absolutely overrated. 1000%. I was thinking when you were talking about TV ads, I was watching live TV last night, which I never do. But, Survivor was on, so I had to watch it. And oh my gosh, so awful. Hate TV ads.
So speaking of Survivor, I was talking to Cliff Ravenscraft last week, and he introduced this idea of micro podcast that can live in perpetuity. So maybe, for example, you really love Survivor, you make a micro podcast about Survivor, and during that, at the end, you give either some sort of ad or call to action. So I want your thoughts. What's your opinion on a small micro podcast? Maybe only it's 10 episodes or so. What are your thoughts? Overrated, underrated?
I think that they are underrated. I think it's a great idea. And the most important part of creating any sort of podcast is promotion, right? So you could create 10 just dynamic, wonderful episodes. And the key is just keep promoting the heck out of it. Because if you set it up that this is this 10 episode series, you could do a lot with it. And the cool thing about dynamic ad insertion is that in a year or 2 years, when, hey, maybe you're getting a ton of downloads on that, then you monetize it. You don't need to monetize it at the very beginning when the audience is small. Yeah,
especially if you've got a piece of content that's evergreen, right? Maybe you're breaking down evergreen. Movies. Yeah, movies, books. And, they're still, like, they just brought back The Sopranos on HBO this last week because they're promoting The Sopranos. So, maybe you created a podcast 15 years ago when Sopranos was big.
Right.
And now they bring it back to life and people want to learn more and they want to engage in that. So something I've been thinking about. It's working in the noggin. Okay. Overrated, underrated, putting your podcast on YouTube.
I think it's underrated. I think everybody should put their podcast on YouTube. I think that my prediction is that in a year or two that everybody is going to be listening to podcasts on YouTube. And if YouTube can do away with their paywall for listening to YouTube, I think that would kill it. And I think that everybody's going to be on YouTube. So you should definitely put your podcast on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Final question here for you. If you had 10 seconds with yourself 10 years ago, what are you going to tell Heather?
I'm going to tell her, go for it, man. Like, I think that, the longer, especially in business, I've been a business owner for, 17 years now. And you second guess yourself so much. And I'm like, you can accomplish so many great things. You just have to know that you can do it and put your mind to accomplishing it.
I love that positivity because you are right. I second guess myself literally every day. And I know you don't see that on social media, After Hours Entrepreneurs, but every single day I ask myself, what am I doing? Why am I even doing this? So words of wisdom, Heather. Heather, thanks for joining the show today. Really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And if anybody wants to learn more about podcast advertising, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn a ton. That's kind of where I hang out the most. So, feel free to come on over and connect with me there.
Yep. You can find out what's good by following Heather Osgood. Heather Osgood's going to show you what's good. Cool. I've been thinking about that the last few days. I'm sorry. It's probably you've heard that a million times before, but I had to put out there.
Hey, it's catchy.
It is. I'm not going to forget Osgood because it's connected with what's good. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, dogs and cats, boys and girls, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time on The After Hours Entrepreneur. Thanks for watching Mark Savant Media. Here we're going to help you create a better content in less time and turn that attention into income. If you love this video, you're going to love these videos here. Click the one. Me and my team specially selected this just for you. Click the link. Check out the video. I'll catch you here next time on Mark Savant Media. Peace.